It has been over 150 years since his passing, and yet the work of Charles Dickens continues to endure as an ever-prevalent source of entertainment to people all around the globe. His epic tales and memorable characters have been seared into the memories of so many of us. He wrote about exploitation, hard times, pollution, and even feminism. The stories that he created, however, were not just about entertainment for the masses. In fact, Charles Dickens used his talent to shine a light on the harsh treatment and unimaginable struggles of the underclasses during the Victorian era in England. Charles John Huffman Dickens was the second of 8 children born in Portsmouth, England on February 7, 1812. His father, John Dickens, was an ambitious man and a naval clerk, and his mother, Elizabeth Barrow, had hopes of becoming a teacher. When Charles was about 9 years old, he took a country walk with his father. While on the walk, he noticed a grand manor called Gad's Hill Place. His father noted it and explained that one day he too could own a grand home, as long as he worked hard. John Dickens taught all of his children that if they worked hard enough, they would be rewarded in life. John and Elizabeth were a very social couple, and although John made a decent salary, the cost of entertaining guests, coupled with such a large family, was more than he can afford. So, in order to cut costs, the family moved to a smaller home in Chatham, Kent, where a young Charles Dickens and his siblings enjoyed playing in the countryside. It was here that a young Charles dreamt of one day becoming a gentleman, and spent much of his time reading books, acting for his family members, and singing songs at the local pub. After a few years had passed, the Dickens family still continued to experience financial trouble. Again, they moved to an even more affordable home in a poor neighborhood in London called Camden Town. Charles was now 12 years old, and his father, who was unable to pay his debts, was sent to prison. As a result of his father's imprisonment, Charles was forced to drop out of school and take a job at a rat-infested boot-blacking factory, where he was paid 6 shillings per week to paste labels on jars of blacking, a material used to give shoes their shine. Although Charles worked extremely hard to help his family in any way that he could, they still faced living on the streets, so the entire family had no choice but to move into the prison along with John. About a year after he was imprisoned, John Dickens received an inheritance from his mother. This allowed him to pay off his debts, and he was set free. Young Charles was thankful that he was able to return to school, but the experience of working in terrible conditions left him much changed. Even at his young age, Charles quickly realized that good people who were doing well for themselves could easily lose it all in an instant. In 1827, at 15 years of age, Charles left school for good. He took a job as an office boy at a law firm where he learned how to write in shorthand. This employment would become the beginning of his writing career. Charles would often observe the clients that came into the office. He would write notes about their appearance or their mannerisms, and many of them would serve as an inspiration for future characters in his stories. His employment with the law firm eventually led to a job as a freelance court reporter. Within a few years, Charles had jobs with 2 London newspapers. But Dickens had a passion for acting and showmanship, and during this time he seriously considered becoming an actor. In fact, he had decided to audition at the Lyceum Theatre. However, he was unwell on the day of his audition and could not attend. He didn't know it then, but this would turn out to be a blessing in disguise for the downtrodden people of London. Dickens began submitting comical sketches to local newspapers under the pen name Boz. These sketches were eventually assembled to create his first book entitled Sketches by Boz. In February 1835, at a party for his 23rd birthday, Charles Dickens was introduced to the daughter of his editor, Catherine Hogarth. Just over 1 year later, the two were married in London on April 2nd, 1836. Now, during this time in Victorian England, the Industrial Revolution was booming, and factories were in need of cheap labor. Through an 1834 law known as the Poor Law, a rule was made that prohibited people from living on the streets. In order to achieve this, the homeless were rounded up and sent to workhouses, where they were forced to work in exchange for food and shelter. The main problem with this law was that workhouses were in essence prisons for poor people. It was also common at the time for people in the upper class to be taught that if someone was poor, it was usually their own fault, or that they were in some way a bad person and deserved their punishment in the workhouses. However, Charles did not agree. Charles's own experience with poverty had taught him that even good, hard-working people could fall on hard times. So he set out on a mission to educate the people in the upper class about society's failings, and he did this by burying a moral lesson within each of his stories. Charles decided that he needed to write a story that would change the hearts and hopefully the minds of the people in the upper class. In order to do that, the story needed to get the reader to identify with the characters. He wanted his readers to understand that even if someone was born with privilege, they were not impervious to falling on hard times. He began with a serialized work that was published only a few chapters at a time, sort of how a television series works today. This work, entitled The Pickwick Papers, left readers speculating about what would happen to the characters next, and his readers were anxiously awaiting the next installments. By the time the fourth issue was published, the name Charles Dickens was being mentioned all over London, and he became quite the celebrity. By the age of 25, he went on to publish another serialized work entitled Oliver Twist. When his wife Catherine gave birth to the first of their 10 children in January of 1837, her 16-year-old sister Mary moved in with them to help out. Dickens's work was in high demand and was selling so well that the family was able to move to a much grander home on Doughty Street. Dickens was delighted by Mary's presence, and Mary adored her ingenious brother-in-law. One night, Charles, Catherine, and young Mary attended the theater. When they returned home, Charles and Mary stayed awake and conversed until 1 a.m. When Mary finally retired for the night, she became seriously ill and collapsed. Charles sent for a doctor and stayed with her while he waited for her fever to break. After many hours, Mary died. Charles was absolutely devastated. This was the first time that Charles Dickens had ever missed a deadline. Later, he would relive the death of Mary when he wrote The Old Curiosity Shop. In 1838, upon hearing about the mistreatment and abuse of young boys in orphanages, Charles made it a point to visit such places, in order to get a first-hand account of what was actually happening. The abuse that he witnessed served as inspiration for his third novel, Nicholas Nickleby, where he attempted to expose the ugly truth of these institutions. Eventually, Charles and his wife Catherine set out on a public reading tour of America in 1842. Charles performed for sold-out theaters and always insisted that tickets were discounted for those who were considered to be working class. However, Dickens returned from his American trip disappointed and attacked slavery in his American notes. He also attacked the American press, whom he blamed for the American people's lack of general information. Soon after, Dickens began work on the first of his Christmas stories, entitled A Christmas Carol. This novella was completed in just 6 weeks and was published on December 19th, just in time for Christmas. This story tapped into old traditions and did much to help renew enthusiasm for the joys of the holidays in both Britain and America. Around the year 1847, Dickens had accrued a substantial amount of money and decided that he could use some of those funds to help those who were in need. One of the greatest issues facing women in Victorian London was that there were few to no options in the way of jobs for those who were uneducated. They could either find a husband to care for them, or they could turn to prostitution. If they could do neither, the final option was to live in a workhouse. Dickens founded the Home for Homeless Women at Urania Cottage, which provided a place for these women to get their lives together. Here they were taught skills that would help get them jobs, and Charles Dickens would interview them in order to learn about their life stories. In 1856, Charles learned that the mansion that his father had once showed him, Gad's Hill Place, was for sale. He decided to purchase the property, and instead of renting it out, he used it quite often as a summer home and retreat where he would often throw lavish parties for his friends. Although they had been married for 20 years, Dickens had become disenchanted with his wife. He had begun to hold her solely responsible for the fact that they had so many children, and was very displeased at her lack of energy. He had even begun to refer to her as fat and boring. Unfortunately, divorce would have been too scandalous, so they just took separate bedrooms. To make his marriage even more untenable, Dickens hired an 18-year-old actress named Ellen Ternan to perform in a benefit presentation of The Frozen Deep, and he soon fell in love with her. In the spring of 1858, Dickens purchased a bracelet as a present for Ellen, but it was accidentally delivered to the Dickens home. When Catherine discovered the gift, she accused him of having an affair. Dickens denied her accusation and insisted that he always gave gifts to the actors in his plays. However, the damage was done. In June of 1858, Charles and Catherine legally separated. Catherine was given a house of her own, and her oldest child went to live with her. But Charles retained custody of the rest of the children, and although he never forbade the children from visiting their mother, he did not encourage them to do so. After his separation from Catherine, Dickens embarked on a series of popular reading tours. Additional works soon followed, including A Tale of Two Cities in 1859 and Great Expectations in 1861. In 1865, while Dickens was returning from a trip to Paris with Ellen Ternan and her mother, the train that they were traveling on experienced a perilous accident when most of the compartments fell from a bridge into a ravine. All but one of the first-class coaches went into the riverbed below. That was the coach that carried Dickens, Ellen, and her mother. Although their carriage did not plummet into the gap, it was hanging off the bridge at a steep angle. However, many others weren't as lucky. 10 people were killed, and about 50 were injured. Once Dickens helped the Turnans from the coach, he went on to assist his fellow passengers. He retrieved a flask of brandy from the train, as well as his top hat. He filled his hat with water, and then did what he could to aid and comfort the injured and the dying. Finally, he made his way back into the wrecked train one last time to retrieve his most current work, Our Mutual Friend. For years after the accident, Dickens would suffer from sudden feelings of anxiety when he was traveling by rail. In November 1867, just 2 years after the end of the Civil War, Dickens once again set sail for his second American reading tour. Throughout his travels, he noticed a change in the American people and their situations, and his harsh opinion of the country changed for the better. During the trip, Dickens maintained a grueling schedule, and by the end of it, he was suffering from serious issues with his sinuses, nose, and throat. Between the years of 1868 and 1869, Dickens gave a series of readings in England, Scotland, and Ireland. Again, his heavy schedule began to have ill effects on his health. However, he pressed on, but soon began to be affected by dizziness and fits of paralysis. Dickens eventually suffered a stroke in April of 1869. Although he was in grave health, Dickens made his last public appearance at a Royal Academy banquet in the presence of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Charles Dickens died on June 8, 1870. He was 58 years old. He had collapsed after suffering another stroke and never regained consciousness. Although it was his wish to be buried privately at Rochester Cathedral, at the behest of his children, he was laid to rest in Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey. The works of Charles Dickens have been loved and adored since they were written, and there have been over 100 film and TV adaptations of those works dating all the way back to 1901. But the real legacy of his work is that it revealed a world of incredible struggles and helped bring about change for so many. If you are not familiar with his writings, I urge you to read his stories and remember that he got his inspiration from someone or something that he was able to behold. I want to say thank you to those of you who are out there watching and always sending words of encouragement for more videos. If you would like to hear more stories of how they died, please help my channel grow by giving this video a thumbs up, clicking that subscribe button, and sharing this video with your friends. Be sure to turn on the notifications so that you never miss a new story. And I will talk to you next time. Bye, guys.